2 Canadians have been killed in Lebanon amid conflict in the region between Israel and Hezbollah. CBC News has confirmed with family that 69-year-old Hussein Tabaja and his wife, 74-year-old Daad Tabaja, died in southern Lebanon.
We are devastated by the loss of 2 Canadians, but the entire Lebanese people are suffering right now. Women, children, innocents, suffering terrible violence and fear. I also spoke yesterday with a number of Lebanese Canadians who are worried for their families, for their friends. This is a horrific situation through which they're going.
Fighting between Israel and Hezbollah escalated this week, and Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 550 people over 2 days, including 50 children. Israel's army chief says they're preparing for a possible ground invasion. Right now, there are nearly 45,000 Canadians in Lebanon, according to Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly.
What I say to Canadians now in Lebanon, not only is it time to leave, but also commercial flights are still available. And it is, at the end of the day, the most safe and the simplest way to come back home.
Peter MacKay was Foreign Affairs Minister when Canada evacuated 15,000 Canadians from Lebanon in 2006. And he joins me now. Peter MacKay, good to speak with you. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, David.
How does what we're seeing here, I mean, Hezbollah has been firing rockets into Israel pretty much nonstop since October 7th, but now things are escalating. How does this compare to what you dealt with in 2006?
Well, there's some eerie parallels. I mean, it was sparked, as you may recall, by an incursion by Hezbollah into Israel, where they killed a number of soldiers and kidnapped others, and that sparked a very immediate military response from the Israeli Defense Force. And unlike the current situation, there wasn't a lot of lead up to that incursion. And so we were tasked literally within 48 hours to attempt to get as many Canadians out as quickly as we could. There was no telling at that point how long the military action would go on. We were focused on Beirut and using our embassy there to try to coordinate this, and we ended up bringing a lot of Canadian personnel, military personnel, and others into the region for that purpose. So there was perhaps, I would argue, a greater sense of urgency and suddenness to the attack, but the task was the same. How do we get as many Canadians safely out of harm's way as possible? And an after-action report that was done by the Senate cast a pretty favorable light on the personnel who did that. And it was an extraordinary time. People came together, departments coordinated that effort. We were sleeping on our couches in our offices and working across, in many cases, party lines to see that happened effectively. It was a fine moment for the Canadian Public Service, in my opinion.
As you said, there wasn't much of a run-up to that situation like there is now. I mean, the intensity, the volatility of it right now is probably orders of magnitude larger given what's been happening in Gaza since October 7th. And when you look at the numbers, Peter MacKay, in the 2006 conflict, 34 days, 10 to 11,000 people wounded. Right. Just in a week, we're up to 5,000 already, and 1,200 people killed in 2006, 500 people killed on Monday alone. I mean, what do you make of the situation the region is facing and the Canadian citizens who are in that region are facing right now?
Well, it's shocking. It's more broad spread. I think the 2006 conflict was more concentrated in one area near where the border incursion had occurred. And around Beirut, but this is this is Hezbollah versus the entire Israeli Defense Force across the country, and so there's no question the casualty rates are higher. Arguably, the risk, I would suggest that in 17, 18 years, unfortunately, the munition has become even more deadly. Their ability to strike quickly. The rules of engagement are not there. They're doing all they can to inflict harm on Hezbollah, and Hezbollah are responding in kind. So, yes, civilians, both Lebanese and Canadian, and other citizens are very much in the crossfire, very much at risk. And so it's incumbent upon all countries, including Canada, to respond. And Minister Joly has been quite adamant in encouraging Canadians to come home. And the numbers, this is where it becomes really difficult, David. Then, as now, it's difficult to determine not only the number, but where they are.
Yeah.
And what is the safest route to get them out.
Yeah, there's about 45,000 Canadian citizens in Lebanon, is what Mélanie Joly said today, but only about 20,000 of them are actually registered with the federal government as sort of citizens abroad. And there are a number of dual nationals who really do live full-time in Lebanon, right? That's sort of the reality of that population. But with this conflict sort of widening, the airport is still working, right? So commercial flights are still available, though there's been a reluctance for people to use it. Mélanie Joly pointed to something today, though, that the explosion that happened in the Beirut port a few years back makes it tough to do the naval evacuation that you did in 2006, right? Because you need a large port for large ships for that capacity. How does that complicate things if it gets to the point that Canada's got to really ramp up escalation in the absence of commercial flights?
Well, I would hope that the lights are on late at the Pearson building and they're looking at these contingency plans. They've also, I believe, as a government writ large, they have a better contingency type of planning and ability to bring sort of an emergency action operations center together. And that's very often the forte of the Canadian Armed Forces. We have something called DART, which is a disaster assistance relief team. That's probably not applicable in this situation. But to your point about the logistics and all the moving parts, we had 7 boats that we had to lease.
Right.
We weren't able to get Canadian Forces assets into the harbor of Beirut. I was on the phone with my counterpart, Minister Tzipi Livni of Israel, coordinating times in which we could have ships enter and leave the port because it was under blockade. So the damage that was done, that you referenced, yes, it may, I don't know, but it may complicate things. There are other ports that can also be accessed. And we leased planes and took people through Cyprus, and we took people into Turkey. In some cases, it was almost like a forward operating base where we were able to move citizens out of Beirut and then be able to take them home. We even used the Prime Minister's plane on one occasion to bring Canadians back. And, it was during that time that the rather uncomfortable realization came and the phrase that I don't use, but that we had citizens of convenience. And that's true in other countries as well. They had passports, but they'd never been to Canada, David.
Right. No, one of my colleagues, Tom Perry, I believe, was with the Prime Minister in France, I think, when they had to fly home commercial because the Prime Minister's plane diverted to this particular effort. But look, you mentioned a lot of the countries Mélanie Joly mentioned today: Turkey, Greece, Cyprus. They've talked to them. They've pre-positioned resources to get people out. She said they're working with, I think, Australia and France, who may have significant diaspora populations there as well. But she's also talked to Israel today, the Israeli Foreign Minister. 2 Canadians were killed, and the belief is that this was an Israeli airstrike that killed them. What do you say to Israel now that Canadian citizens have been killed in a situation like this? I mean, there's been a growing tension between the two because of the calls for ceasefire and the conduct of the war in Gaza. What would you say as a foreign minister to the Israeli foreign minister and the ambassador when something like this happens?
Well, it's not a comfortable conversation, to be sure, and you're obliged to call for caution, to call for restraint. Those are normal words to be using in the context, but there's also this sad reality of conflict in that region where Hezbollah and the Israeli Defense Forces are at war, and this is a very difficult situation to manage from Ottawa or from any nation's capital. So it's incumbent upon you to speak to your counterparts and call for cooperation, call for efforts to try to de-escalate. But in some cases, you're really making a plea on behalf of your country to try to help protect your citizens. And that's where I hearken back to this reference to my conversations about the coordination effort and the ability to try to build a hypothetical bubble of support and protection around your own citizens. Easy to say, virtually impossible to do, but the conversations have to happen.
Peter MacKay, former Foreign Affairs Minister, thanks for being here with us today. I always appreciate the time.
Thank you, David. All the best.